They say you never truly know someone until you've seen them in the quiet moments, the ones they don't perform for anyone. I saw mine through a kitchen window at 6 a.m. when a man in uniform was slow dancing alone in his living room. That was the moment I stopped being careful. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday, which Eli Hassan had always believed was the most forgettable day of the week. He was working from home that morning. Laptop balanced on his knees, half a cup of cold coffee on the windowsill. When the rumbling diesel engine pulled up across the narrow courtyard of the Maplewood Terrace apartment complex, he lived in Unit 4B. The unit directly across 4A had been empty for 3 weeks. He had enjoyed the silence. He did not enjoy what came next. Not because it was unpleasant. Quite the opposite. The man who stepped out of the moving truck cab was tall. Not in the exaggerated, comic book way, just genuinely, quietly tall. With wide shoulders and the kind of posture that suggested he had spent years being told to stand up straight and finally made peace with it, he wore a plain gray t-shirt and dark jeans. And his forearms, visible as he reached up to pull, opened the truck's back door, were the kind of forearms that Eli had previously believed only existed in Cologne. Advertisements. Eli looked away, then looked back. The man laughed at something. The truck driver said a short, surprised laugh, like he hadn't expected to find anything funny, and Eli felt something shift in his chest. A small, quiet thing, like a door opening a crack. Stop it, he told himself, and went back to his spreadsheet. He learned the man's name 3 days later, when the building super knocked on his door and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that his new neighbor was a police officer. "Just so you know," Mrs. Petrov said, in her particular way of delivering information that was meant to be reassuring but rarely was, "Officer Kalam Reed. Transferred from the North Precinct." Very polite. Shook my hand properly. Eli thanked her and closed the door. Callum. He rolled the name around in his mind the way you test a word in a new language, checking its weight and texture. It suited the forearms. It suited the laugh. "You are a 31-year-old graphic designer who has not been on a date in 14 months, he reminded himself. You are not doing this. He did not introduce himself that week. He told himself it was because he was busy, and he was genuinely in the middle of a rebranding project for a textile company that had very strong opinions about the color beige. But there were moments, small and accidental, that kept pulling him toward awareness of the man across the courtyard. The sound of keys at 5:45 a.m., sharp and purposeful. When Callum left for his shift, the blue uniform glimpsed through the gap in the hallway. The way one evening, Eli had gone to get water and seen the kitchen light across the way, warm and yellow, and Callum standing at his counter, eating cereal out of the box, reading something on his phone with a small, private smile. It was such an ordinary thing. Eli stood in his own dark kitchen for longer than necessary. Watching that warm square of light, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, curious not about the man's life in a nosy way, not in the way of wanting to uncover something, just curious in the way you feel about a book that looks interesting, the kind of curiosity that feels almost like hope. The introduction happened on a Saturday. By accident, in the way most meaningful things do, Eli was returning from the farmer's market, canvas bags in both hands, and he fumbled his keys at the building entrance. They fell. He crouched to pick them up, and when he stood, Callum Reed was holding the door open, looking at him with dark brown eyes that were, Eli noted immediately, unexpectedly kind. "I've got it," Callum said. "Thank you." Eli stepped through. "I'm Eli. 4B. Callum." For a he held out his hand and Eli shook it. Firm grip, warm. "The super mentioned you. Said you work from home graphic design?" "She mentioned me?" Callum smiled slightly. "She mentioned everyone. I think she compiled a welcome packet." Eli laughed despite himself. "That sounds exactly right." They walked toward the elevator together, which Eli would later describe to his best friend Dana as a perfectly normal 30 seconds that I have replayed approximately 40 times. Because in those 30 seconds, he learned that Callum had a dry, understated sense of humor, that he asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. That he smelled like cedar and something faintly clean, like morning air. And that when the elevator doors opened and they stepped in, and for just a moment stood shoulder to shoulder in that small mirrored box. Callum glanced at him sidelong and said, "Nice tomatoes." By the way, nodding at his market bag, and Eli had to look straight ahead at his own reflection and physically remind himself to breathe. You are not doing this. But something in him, quiet and stubborn and tired of being careful, whispered back, "What if you did?" The weeks that followed were a study in the particular. Exquisite discomfort of wanting to know someone better and not quite. Knowing how to begin, they crossed paths with the irregular frequency of neighbors who keep different schedules, Callum often leaving before dawn, sometimes returning in the late afternoon with the particular quietness of someone who has seen too much in a single day, sometimes not returning until after Eli had already turned his lights off. On Wednesdays, they both coincidentally did laundry the first Wednesday. It was awkward, polite nods, separate machines. Both reading things on their phones with a concentration that was almost certainly performed. The second Wednesday, Callum said, "Do you fold everything the same day? Or is that just me being strange?" And Eli said, "I've been known to leave clean laundry in the basket for up to 4 days." And Callum laughed, that same short, surprised laugh from moving day, and said, "Okay, I feel better." And somehow, from there, they talked for 45 minutes. About the neighborhood, about the coffee shop on Renner Street that Callum had discovered, about a documentary Eli had been watching, about the specific sadness of eating alone at a table meant for 4. That last one came from Callum, offered casually, almost offhanded. And Eli recognized it, the way you recognize something that lives in you too, not with excitement, but with the deep, steady resonance of being understood. He drove home from that laundry room, home being 15, feet up the elevator, thinking about a man who slow danced alone in his living room and ate cereal out of the box and said quiet, honest things as if vulnerability were nothing to be afraid of. Maybe it isn't. Eli thought, maybe I've just been afraid of the wrong things. It was Dana who named it first. "You're in the talking stage," she announced, from across Eli's kitchen table, stealing a piece of his toast with the casual authority of a 15-year friendship. "You're doing the thing where you don't say anything, but you're both saying everything. We're neighbors," Eli said. You described the exact angle of his laugh. It was being descriptive. "I'm a visual person." Dana gave him the look. The one that meant, "I love you, but please." Eli, you lit up when you said his name. He didn't have an answer for that. He looked down at his coffee. "It's a police officer," he said finally. So he could be, I don't know, straight, conservative, complicated? Dana shrugged. Everyone's complicated. The question is whether he's the kind of complicated that's worth it. Eli thought about the laundry room, about the specific sadness of eating alone at a table meant for 4. "I don't know yet," he said, honestly. Dana smiled. "That means you're paying attention." The shift happened on a Thursday in November, when the city dropped 10 degrees overnight, and the courtyard filled with that particular gray light that makes everything feel slightly suspended, like the world is holding its breath. Eli had been working late, pushing through the final stages of the textile rebrand. And at around 9 p.m., he realized he hadn't eaten anything since noon. He went to the kitchen. He had eggs, 3 tomatoes, and the ghost of a meal plan. He was standing at the stove when he heard it. Not a sound exactly, more an absence of one. The particular quiet of the apartment across the way. But then he glanced up and saw Callum's kitchen light was on, and Callum was sitting at his table. Not eating, not reading, just sitting still with his hands around a mug, staring at nothing. Eli recognized that particular stillness. He'd sat in it himself after the breakup with Marcus, after his father's surgery. After certain days that accumulated their weight silently and then presented the bill all at once, he stood there for a moment, certain. Then he made 2 omelets. He knocked on 4A with a plate in each hand. And absolutely no plan. Callum opened the door, still in his uniform shirt, collar open, sleeves rolled, and looked at Eli with an expression that moved through surprise. confusion, and something quieter and harder to name, all in the space of a second. "I made too much," Eli said, which was obviously not true, but was the only sentence he had prepared. Callum looked at the plates, then at Eli. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." The apartment was sparsely furnished in the way of someone who had moved many times and stopped committing to spaces. A good couch. A bookshelf that was actually used. A small record player on the floor by the window, which explained the slow dancing. A detail Eli filed away privately. They sat at Callum's kitchen table and ate, and at first the conversation. With surface things, the omelet, Callum said it was better than anything he'd made in months. The cold front, a new coffee blend Eli had tried. But after a while, in the way that late evenings sometimes allow, the surface things gave way to deeper water. "Bad day?" Eli asked. Callum was quiet for a moment. "A kid got hurt. On my block. He's okay, he'll be okay. But there's a window of time, after something like that, where you don't know yet, and you carry it home. I'm sorry I chose this job," said it without self-pity, just plainly. "But choosing it doesn't make it lighter." Eli nodded. He thought about the right thing to say, and then chose honesty instead. "My dad had heart surgery 2 years ago. For about 6 hours, we didn't know. I kept making tea. I didn't drink, just to have something to do with my hands." Callum looked at him. "Did it help? The tea?" "No. The having something to do. A little. A small silence. Then, hence the omelet." "Hence the omelet." Callum smiled. It was different from his other smiles, not the dry, surface smile from the elevator, not the surprised laugh from moving day. This one was slower, quieter, the kind of smile that meant something. "Thank you," he said. "For knocking. You looked like someone who needed to not be alone," Eli said, and then immediately second-guessed it, too much to direct. But Callum didn't pull back. "I did," he said simply. "I really did." After that, the careful distance between them collapsed, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the gradual, inevitable way that warmth overtakes cold when you stop resisting it. They had dinner together twice the following week. Not planned exactly, Callum would text made too much pasta, interested? Or Eli would knock with leftover soup, and it became a language of its own. An admission in the form of food. On one of those evenings, Callum put a record on, something slow and old that Eli didn't recognize, and they sat on the couch talking until midnight. And at one point their conversation fell into a comfortable silence and neither of them filled it, and that felt like something too. But neither of them said anything. Not yet, because there was still the question neither had answered, the one that lived in the sidelong glances. In the way Callum's hand had briefly touched his shoulder when he laughed, in the specific awareness Eli had of exactly where Callum was in any room they shared. The question didn't have a language yet. It was only feelings. Soft and persistent. Like a song playing in another room, the conversation that changed things happened on a Friday, unexpectedly. When Eli mentioned Marcus, not fully, just a reference, an edge of something. He said, "After my last relationship ended, I spent about 6 months convincing myself I preferred being alone. Turns out I just preferred it to the specific wrong person." Callum was quiet in that attentive way of his, the way Eli had come to recognize as genuine listening, not the performative kind. "How long were you together?" he asked. 3 years. He was. Eli paused. He wasn't unkind. He just didn't have space for all of me. And I spent a long time making myself smaller, and then one day I just couldn't anymore. Callum nodded slowly. Then, almost carefully, "I was with someone for 2 years, about 4 years ago." He turned his mug slowly on the table. His name was Daniel. He was a paramedic. We were good together, I think, but we were also... He searched for words. We were both people who carry things alone. And we never learned to put things down together. Eventually there was just too much weight. The word his landed quietly in the room. Eli let it land. Didn't react in a way that would make Callum feel observed. Just nodded. The way you nod when someone says something that resonates. "I understand that," Eli said. "The carrying alone thing." Their eyes met across the table. And for a moment, something unspoken moved between them. Not a confession, not a declaration, but a recognition. The kind that happens when two people realize they have been speaking the same language all along without knowing its name. December arrived with its particular alchemy, the city softened by lights and cold air. Everything carrying the slightly heightened quality of a world preparing to be seen. Eli and Callum had settled into something that had no official name, which was, Eli had decided, both the most wonderful and most terrifying thing he had experienced in recent memory. They were not dating. They were not just neighbors. They were somewhere in the tender, uncertain geography between a country without maps, where every gesture carried possible meaning and nothing was certain, and the uncertainty itself had begun to feel like something he didn't want to rush. Dana called it the precipice. "You're both standing at the edge," she said during one of their weekend calls. "One of you has to jump first. What if I jump and he doesn't follow, and you find out and it hurts, then eventually it doesn't?" That's the least comforting thing you've ever said. You don't need comfort right now. You need courage. The precipice moment came, as these things often do, without announcement. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks into December. They had been watching an old film at Callum's, something Dana had recommended. It's quiet and slow, the kind of movie that creates atmosphere rather than urgency. At some point, the credits rolled, and neither of them moved. And the apartment held that particular afternoon light, gray gold and slanted. That makes everything feel suspended. Eli was aware of the distance between them, or the lack of it specifically. Somewhere in the second hour they had shifted imperceptibly, till there was only a few inches of couch between them, and Callum's arm was resting along the back of the cushions behind Eli's shoulders in a way that was not quite an arm around him, but was undeniably close. The film ended. The light shifted. Neither of them spoke. Then Callum said quietly, "Eli," just his name. Dot. Eli turned to look at him, and found Callum already looking. With an expression he recognized now, the slow, quiet smile. That wasn't for the surface. That meant something under it. "I need to tell you something," Callum said. His voice was low, careful. "And I've been not telling you for a while, because I didn't want to," he exhaled. "I didn't want to get it wrong." "Tell me," Eli said. His heart was moving strangely. "I look forward to you," Callum said, which was a particular and deliberate choice of words that Eli would think about later. Not "I like you." Not "I've been thinking about you," but "I look forward to you." As if Eli were something on the horizon, something worth moving toward. "In a way, I haven't looked forward to someone in a long time." "Okay, no, we haven't. I know there hasn't been." He paused. "But try it again. I'm better at showing up than at saying things." "You're saying something right now?" Eli said softly. Callum looked at him steadily. "I want to know what this is." "Well, we are. Because every time I walk through that door and know you're 30 feet away, something in me." He pressed his lips together. "Settles. And I don't think that's nothing." Eli was quiet for a moment. He was aware of every point of potential contact, a few inches of air between them. Callum's arm still resting behind him, the quality of the light falling across Callum's face. He thought about Marcus, about making himself small. About 6 months of convincing himself he preferred being alone. He thought about what Dana said. "One of you has to jump first." "It's not nothing," Eli said. "But it hasn't been nothing for a while." Something in Callum's face changed, released. Like a long-held breath finally let go, and he reached up, and his hand came to rest gently on the curve of Eli's jaw. The way you touch something you've been thinking about for too long and have finally stopped being afraid of. Eli leaned in, and Callum met him, and the kiss was quiet, unhurried, deliberate. Warm, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles into you like it was always there, waiting to be found. After, they sat in the fading afternoon light and talked, really talked. In the way you only can once the uncertain thing has been decided, and Eli felt something in his chest that he recognized as relief, but deeper than that, as arrival, like a key turning in a lock you'd forgotten you had. Callum made tea. Real tea properly leaves, not bags, and brought it over and sat close, and their shoulders touched, and neither of them moved away. "Can I ask you something?" Eli said. "Anything." The slow dancing. Callum turned to look at him. A beat of silence. Then a slow, slightly embarrassed smile. "You saw that?" "First week. Kitchen window. 6 in the morning." Callum shook his head, looking at the middle distance. I do that sometimes. After hard nights, there's something about, he considered, about moving to music when you can't sleep. It helps regulate something in me that words can't reach. Eli thought about that. About making tea you don't drink. About the different languages of getting through things.
What song was it?
He asked. Callum picked up his phone, scrolled briefly. And then music filled the small apartment, something old and slow. A voice and a guitar warmth made sound. He stood up and held out his hand. Eli looked at it for a moment. Then he took it. They slow danced in the fading December light, which was something Eli had once watched through glass and thought, I want to be in that room. And now he was, and it was more than he had imagined it could be, which was its own particular kind of revelation. Callum rested his chin lightly on top of Eli's head, and Eli felt the steady, reliable warmth of him, and thought, this is what I was being careful about. This is what was on the other side of careful. January brought snow, which transformed the courtyard of Maplewood Terrace into something that looked like a postcard version of itself. Clean lines, softened edges, the world made simple for a moment. Eli and Callum spent New Year's Eve together, cooking an elaborate dinner they had planned all week in text messages, full of recipe links and debated opinions on whether risotto was worth the effort. Callum said yes. Eli maintained it was a trap. The risotto, when finished, was excellent, and he admitted this with the specific grace of someone who enjoys being wrong in comfortable company.
They were,
by then, officially and quietly together. No dramatic announcement. No particular defining conversation, just a natural settling into something that had been inevitable for months. Callum now had a key to 4B. Eli had begun leaving a coffee mug at 4A, small domesticities. Accumulating on the first day of the new year, they sat together at Callum's window and watched the snow come down. And Eli thought about the moving truck on a Tuesday, which he had thought was the most forgettable day of the week. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about several things. It turned out about preferring to be alone, about being too careful to leap, about the man in blue across the courtyard being something to look away from. Callum had been holding a book, but he had stopped reading it, and his hand had found Eli's on the windowsill between them. Unhurried, certain. What are you thinking about? Callum asked. Eli considered telling him something clever or deflecting into a joke, which had been his instinct for so long it had become almost invisible. Instead, he said, I'm thinking that I'm glad you moved in. Callum looked at him, that slow, quiet smile. Yeah, he said. Me too. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the record player turned. And in apartment 4A on the first morning of a new year, two people who had spent too long eating at tables meant for four sat side by side in a small, warm room, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like the silence needed to be filled. It was already full.